Several weeks we have been going through, basically, in some sense, the story of Joseph, or the journey of Joseph. As he is kind of coming out, he's been sold by his brothers, and now has made his way into Egypt. And in Egypt, through various things that happened, he has been charged with the things. Basically in the entire kingdom. Only in relations to the throne is Pharaoh greater than Joseph. And so we pick up the story in chapter 42. And just reading verses 1 through 6 today. This will kind of give us a backdrop of what we want to do today. When Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise we will die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin, go with them, for fear some harm might come to him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Verse 6, since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. If you recall Jacob's or Joseph's dream years prior to this, remember he had a dream that they were out in the fields, they're basically harvesting, and all of a sudden his bundle of wheat stood up, and he saw 11 others bundles of wheat or grain come and bow down to his. You remember the response of his brothers? "Man, what is wrong with you? What kind of dream is that?" Today, we see that dream is fulfilled. It's realized. As Joseph is sitting there, his brothers come. It wasn't 11 at this time, the first time, but 10 come. They bow down low before Joseph. They have no idea it's Joseph, obviously. Today, we're going to wrap up the story, the journey to Egypt. We're going to wrap up the story today. And through the life of Joseph, we learn that God's plan is always at work. It's always good. It's intricate. It's complicated. But it is always good. That God's plan is always good. There are times when certain events are anything but good, right? So when we look even at the story of Joseph, there are certain events that happened in Joseph's life, so we cannot say that that was good. We can't say that you and I would love to experience some of the things that he experienced. Being sold into slavery, being falsely accused of a crime you didn't commit, being imprisoned. Those are things that are not enjoyable. Yet overall, though, God's plan is good. Joseph went through quite a bit. He experienced many hardships. His life had many twists and turns. But God had a plan for him. He had a plan for the family. And we witnessed the amazing way God executed that plan. It was an incredible way for him to execute that plan. So I want to highlight some truths this morning about God's plan and what we learn, or what we can learn through the life of Joseph. The first point this morning is God uses extreme measures to execute his good plan. God uses extreme measures to execute his good plan. Many years has gone by, and when we jump ahead to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph is kind of reflecting back on all of the events that happened. Genesis 50:20. During conversation with his brothers, During the conversation with his brothers, Joseph says this: "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people." This many years after the fact, Joseph is now reflecting on all of that happened. He's saying, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to save the lives of many people." This is a very mature view of things from Joseph. The brothers wanted to kill him at the beginning. We saw in Genesis 36, 37. They wanted to kill him, but they're like, "Oh no, let's just sell him." So they sold him into slavery. What the brothers didn't realize was that their intent to harm Joseph was actually part of God's plan. To place Joseph into this position, as his brothers call or refer to him as the governor of the area, to save lives, including their very own. Joseph acknowledged that God brought him to Egypt so that God could use him to save many lives. God uses extreme measures to accomplish his good plan. God's plan is always good. This plan, in particular, that we looked at, contains some extreme measures. He had Joseph sold into slavery. He had him imprisoned. But he also had him, find favor from his master, Potiphar, as well as the warden in prison. Lots of different things. Lots of extremes. Yet these were all necessary to accomplish God's plan. Second point this morning is this. We also learn from Joseph's story that God uses extreme measures to move us in the right direction. God uses extreme measures to move us in the right direction. What I mean by this is this. Think back with me to the story of Jonah. In Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, we're told, hey, in the beginning of that story, God tells Jonah, "I want you to go to Nineveh. And I want you to go and preach. I have compassion on the people. I want to rescue them or save them." Jonah's like, "No thanks." He says no to God. If Nineveh is this way, he heads the opposite direction. He goes, he gets in a boat, and they sail off. Jonah is sleeping as the boat begins to take on water from a fierce storm that comes. Everybody is frantically searching. All of a sudden, we read, I think it's in chapter 1, verse 6, the captain goes, it's like, "Where's that Jonah guy?" And he goes downstairs, and he finds Jonah sleeping. And he wakes him up. He says, "Don't you care if we die? Call out to your God. Perhaps your God will have mercy on us." Jonah's like, "I know why the storm is here." And then they go through this long conversation. He's just like, "You know what, guys? Just throw me overboard. And you guys will be all okay." Long story short, God uses a giant fish, to cause Jonah to move in the direction that he wants. God uses extreme measures to get us to move in the direction that he wants. God said, "Go to Nineveh," and Jonah said, "No thanks." As he was going the other way, God used a fish to cause him to turn around and head into the direction that he wanted him to go. When we look at the story of Joseph, Jacob, as we read in chapter 42, he's an old man now. And he has been living in this land for a long, long time, land of Canaan. And if God said to him, "Hey, I want you to move to Egypt," would that have been an easy decision? To uproot his entire family, to move to a foreign country. If God came to you today and said, "Hey, I want you to move to pick a country," Not the one that you would want to move to, but something that you wouldn't want to move. Let's pick a dangerous country. God says, go to Syria. Many of us will pull a Jonah. And you know what God's going to do? He might not use a fish, but he'll use something to cause us to go the direction that he wants us to. That's just the way that God works. The famine was extreme. The famine was so severe that in chapter 42 we see Jacob says, go buy some food because I heard there is grain in Egypt. Go and buy some food for us so that we will not die. As we read the story, as we read the story of Joseph, we see that the famine was supposed to be 7 years long. And as we continue, if you read through the rest of this chapter, we see that it's only 2 years into the famine. There's 5 more years left. They're running out of food already. The famine was severe. It was as bad as it was advertised. It has come to Joseph and his family, or Jacob and his family, and they are running dangerously low of food. So he sends his sons. Not 11 sons. He sends just the 10. And him not sending Benjamin, actually, it's pretty significant. God loved Jacob very much. And he needed to do something drastic to get Jacob to move, I believe, from where he was to Egypt. God uses extreme measures to get us to move into the direction that he wants. It's almost like God gave Jacob no choice. Hey, if you stay, you will die. That's an extreme measure. You have no choice. Pack up all your belongings, take your family, take your livestock with you, go to Egypt. It's almost like no choice. Stay and die or go and live. The famine was an extreme measure that God used to get Jacob and his family to move from where they were to the direction that he wanted. Just like Jonah, God used an extreme measure to get Jonah to move in the direction he wanted. Third point this morning, third thing that we learn in the story of Joseph is that God uses extreme measures to test our obedience. How do we respond to trials? How do we respond to temptations? How do we respond to the hardships that you and I face? Some of us, we fight. We are determined that we will not be overcome by these hardships, these struggles. We remain strong and steadfast. Others, it just continues to batter you again and again and again until it just basically pummels you into submission. And at that point, you just say, you know what, I give up. Those are some of the responses that you and I have experienced. Jacob lost the son that he loved the most. At least that's what he thinks, right? He lost the son. Because that's what he was told, that Jacob is dead. And his sons even produced the robe, all bloodied. So Jacob holds on to that pain. And he's also faced with a difficult choice. If you read the story from chapter 42 on, they go to Egypt to buy food. They're there, bow low before Joseph. And Joseph recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. So he begins to question them, kind of treats them harshly. This is, if you were watching a movie, this is the point where you think, oh, this is Joseph's revenge upon his brothers. This is going to be good. And so we start seeing all of this interaction. And he starts asking all these questions. Do you have a father? Is he still alive? Is this it? Do you have any other siblings? And then they respond, we have another one. He's younger, We have 2 more brothers. One is no more. The other is at home with their father. He imprisons them. He accuses them of being spies. Sends them into jail. 3 days later, he brings them out. He says, one of you stay. The rest can go home. Bring back the youngest. That's how I will know that you are not spies. Bringing back the youngest son or the youngest brother. That's kind of all of the things that's happening in chapters 43, 44. So when they come back to Egypt, -1, and tell Jacob, hey, we have to take Benjamin with us, or else he said he's not going to release your one son that is still trapped. Genesis 42, verse 38. At the end of the chapter, it says, my son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. He's talking about Benjamin. If anything should happen to him on your journey, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave. This was a tough choice for Jacob. This is what he says about Benjamin. He is all I have left. If anything should happen to him on your journey, you will send, basically, you're going to send me to the grave. If anything happens to Benjamin, I've already lost Joseph. If anything happens to Benjamin, I'm going to die. So no, you cannot take Benjamin. He will not go with you. So they bring all the food back, and the food is gone. They run out of food. And finally, Jacob makes the tough choice to send Benjamin and all of these other things with him to go buy food and to basically free. I think it was it Reuben or Simeon, I think, who was imprisoned or kept behind by Joseph. What did God want Jacob to do? God wanted Jacob to move to Egypt. If Jacob was just given a choice to move, I think, without anything happening, I don't know how easily he would have made that choice. Some of you have moved from one place to another. Some of you guys went out of the area for school. We all come to decisions regarding these things. We come to these decisions with much prayer, with much thought, and with much conversation with our parents or our families. But sometimes certain things happen in our lives that makes that decision a little bit easier. And I believe that's what's going on here. Jacob is excited. When his sons return in chapter 45, when they return, they tell him, hey, Joseph is alive, Dad. He's actually alive, and he is the ruler or governor of Egypt. And he wants you to come. Chapter 45, verse 28, Jacob says this, it must be true, my son Joseph is alive. I must go and see him before I die. If Joseph wasn't in Egypt, I don't think Jacob would be so eager to go. But his beloved son not only is alive, but he's in Egypt. And so Jacob says, I will go. And just in case he has any doubts about this move that he's about to make, uprooting his family and going, God says to him in Genesis 46, verse 3 through 4, he says, I am the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. The promise that he makes here to Jacob is the same one he made to his father, that God made to his father before, that he will make him into a great nation. There. Just that word alone tells us that this was going to be not a short-term move. He's not going there just for this famine until the famine is over. God's intent is that they are going to be immigrating to Egypt. And just as he promised Abraham, he says, I will make you into a great nation there. So do not be afraid. Go. Go to Egypt. God uses extreme measures to test our obedience. We also learn from Joseph's story that God uses extreme measures to provide for his people. God uses extreme measures to provide for his people. You know, you read the stories of some of the great missionaries when they're serving overseas. Especially those that work with children in orphanages or something like that. And it's incredible, their story. They're like, we have no money, we have no food, all of these children are hungry, and then randomly something happens. Somebody drops off some money, somebody drops off something. Kids are fed. They don't go hungry. God has an incredible way of providing for his people. And that is what we see here. The famine was severe. But God gave advance warning to Pharaoh so that he can get ready. Through God's providence and his plan, extreme measures, Joseph was nearby, rotting away in jail, having interpreted the dreams previously to the cupbearer, who 2 years later, remembers, there was a Hebrew who interpreted dreams and it happened just the way that he predicted. He is brought in before Pharaoh to interpret those dreams. He gives an interpretation. Pharaoh finds that interpretation to be acceptable. He finds favor from Pharaoh, and he is elevated to this position of honor and power and authority. These are extreme measures that God uses what? To provide for the people. He's saying 7 years there will be an abundance. I want you to gather. Store the food so that during the 7 years of severe famine, people have enough to eat. Without the dream to Pharaoh, without Pharaoh having that dream, without Joseph being there to interpret it. And why was Joseph there? He was sold by his brothers. He was tempted by Potiphar's wife, resisted yet was accused wrongly, imprisoned, and he was in jail while all this was occurring. God used all of these extreme events to ultimately provide for his people, because the famine will be severe. In an interaction with his brothers, Joseph says in chapter 45, verse 5, but don't be upset, don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Not just their lives, but the lives of many. God uses extreme measures to provide for his people. So through the life of Joseph and his family, we see God's amazing plan is fulfilled. You know, I said during the first week of the message 4 weeks ago, as we began the message series, I said that we will study how the Israelites got to Egypt. That's what we have done. That's the first part of this message series. Then we're going to look at what happened in Egypt. And then we will look at the events that led to them being released, or the whole Exodus aspect. Throughout our study, it will be clear that God orchestrated the events in the characters' lives to accomplish his ultimate purpose. It doesn't mean that these people didn't suffer, didn't have any hardships. In fact, it was through these trials that God fulfilled his purpose. So we keep in mind that we face trials and things happen in our lives that may not make sense at the moment. But in the grand scheme of things, God is using these events or circumstances to bring about his plans to accomplish his purpose in our lives. You know, God uses extreme measures to accomplish his good plan. If we look hard enough, we will see it and know that God is actively moving and orchestrating the events in our lives to accomplish his good plan. And some of you have experienced the extreme measures of God in your life. And I believe that. Some of you have experienced events or a series of events that leaves no doubt in your life that God was behind it. That there is no other explanation of how these events occurred to cause you to go into the direction that God wanted, or to obey what God wanted you to do. When I think about the fact that I lived in Los Angeles, that I actually moved to Los Angeles, the city that I never wanted to live in, I think there were some extreme measures that took place. One, I was old and single. Number two, my parents were very concerned that I would never find anyone to get married to here in Portland. Church members are very concerned as they were beginning to really intercede and pray for me and ask, are you sure your standards are not too high? All of these things happened. I felt like I was in a place in ministry where I'm like, man, I've been doing ministry now for about 8 or 10 years, and I just don't feel like I'm growing. So all of these factors played a role in ultimately me responding to this pastor in California who called me and said, hey, I need you to come and help me with something. I said no to him many times. But later I found out that he called my parents. And he said, I think it's good for John to come down. I think it'll be a good experience. And who knows, maybe he'll get married. That was the ticket right there for my parents. They came to me and they're like, we want you to go to LA. Those are extreme measures. You and I, we have experienced these extreme measures by God to cause us to move into the direction that he wants. God is in the process of accomplishing his plan in our lives, amen? He is doing it right now. I know sometimes right now we think, God, you know what, God? I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. I'm in this job, or I'm going to school, and I want to study this, but I really want to do this. And I'm doing this because I know that will make my parents happy. I know a guy who went to school and he just doing all of these things that his parents wanted. Deep down inside, you know what he wanted to do? He wanted to be a chef. 4 years he went to school, got his degree, worked, unhappy. Finally he said, I'm going to go to culinary school. And he was happy. And his parents were like, why did we waste all that money? There are things that are happening in our lives that may not seem like it, but God is actively moving in your life at this moment. If you look at the life of Joseph, you might be in that being sold stage. You might be in that finding favor stage. You might be in the jail stage. You could be in all of these different stages, but know and believe that God is actively moving in your life. You may not seem like it right now. It may not be clear at the moment. But rest assured that God is moving in your life. And that when the time comes, He will make it all known. That moment came for Joseph as he reflected and looked back and said to his brothers, you meant to harm. You meant all these events to harm me, but God meant it for good. Until then, no matter how difficult things might be, whether God seems to be silent, whether God seems to be cruel, let us remember Joseph's story and know that in the end, God's amazing plan is at work.